Hello, and welcome to the North Coast Journal Preview. This is a show where we take a look at what's coming to the current edition of the North Coast Journal. I am your host, Tanya Shrum, and we are joined as usual by North Coast Journal's news editor, Thad Greenson, and arts and features editor, Jennifer Fumiko Cahill. Welcome, both of you, and I hope you're having a great week so far.
So far,
so good.
So far, so good. I am doing well, getting through it. on the countdown to a long weekend.
Nice.
We're already working into next week, so for us it's like already Thanksgiving week.
That's kind of how I'm feeling, that it's going to take forever to get here. Well, let's get started on this week and what's coming to the cover of the North Coast Journal. Thad, would you like to fill us in?
Yeah, Tanya, this week we have a cover story that I wrote that I've been working on for a few months now about a situation at Bayview Heights, which is folks who drive through Eureka will know the building, if not by name. It's the kind of olive, army green, geometrically designed place about a block up from the Co-op on 5th Street. Really, aesthetically nice new building that went up. Started building it in 2019. And the story that came to be because I was contacted, like I said, some months back by a veteran who lives there, a man by the name of Michael Moss, who wanted to talk to me about just frustrations that he and some other veterans have in the living situation. And so I went down and met with him and about a half dozen other veterans that are there. And they kind of described the situation, which I had been unaware of, but that the project, the building was built by Nation's Finest and Danco. Danco is the builder and the property manager, and Nation's Finest was kind of financing the project as a veterans housing initiative. And basically they ran into some struggles trying to come up with the full financing of the project. And so it was planned as a 50-unit complex. And what they ended up doing is reserving 25 of those units for veteran housing, and then partnering with the county, the Department of Health and Human Services, for the other 25 beds, which are going to be basically housed through a housing first or various housing first programs. So programs designed to get chronically homeless people off the streets as quickly as possible and into supportive housing. And so I sat down with Michael and these other veterans, and as they started talking, initially they were just kind of rattling off complaints with the place, and all of them, really had to do with some folks being moved in there that were not housing ready, quote unquote, and folks who were on the streets because they had severe mental illness and weren't accessing services since they'd been placed in housing and had disruptive or really destructive or in some cases violent behaviors. So they had stories about just frustrations in their apartments about not getting minor maintenance things fixed because folks in other apartments were destroying them, tearing cabinets off the walls or flooding them repeatedly, things like that. They had complaints of folks screaming at all hours of the night because they're in the midst of mental health crises. Also had complaints of, visitors coming at all hours and banging on the doors and banging on the windows, trying to get residents' attention. Just, we're sounding like it was a very stressful place for them to live. I was very, sympathetic to all of this. But then what kind of became apparent through this meeting and a couple of other subsequent meetings is, while all these frustrations and all these problems with their living situation are very real, that there's also, that's kind of a fraction of the clientele that live there are creating these problems. And there is kind of an interesting, community aspect to the other residents. And so, for example, in the first meeting, one of the veterans was telling me about how, one afternoon the police had to be called to the apartment complex because they thought that somebody was basically cooking meth in one of the apartments. It just smelled so strongly of chemicals. And they'd knocked on the door, nobody had answered. And so finally the property manager called the police, and the police show up and bang on the door. And come to find out that it was somebody in there painting bicycles. They had 3 or 4 bicycles that they were painting and refinishing in their apartment without, opening any windows or any ventilation or anything. And so shortly after he's telling me the story, a younger gentleman, probably in his, mid to late 30s, comes in to get coffee in the common room. And they're like, "Oh, so-and-so, come sit down. We were just telling him about the time you were painting the bicycles." And this guy's, "Oh yeah," introduced myself as a reporter. And he was like, "Yeah." And I was like, "So what happened?" He was like, "Well, kind of told me his story that he'd been, chronically homeless for 20 years. And this was the first place he'd lived. And he said that, he just didn't really think it through and didn't put down a drop cloth, didn't think about going to outside or anything like that, and was painting all these bicycles. And next thing he knew, the police showed up at his door. But in the course of talking to him, it came to see that he had really kind of come a long way since he'd been at Bayview Heights, and now was, no longer painting bicycles and doing other stuff like that in his apartment. And also developed a bit of a relationship with these guys. Go ahead, Jen.
I also want to point out that when the police came through his door, there was red paint everywhere. Yeah. And so for a minute, it was touch and go.
For a minute, he said the officers were unsure what they had just walked into. But so that kind of anecdote just really reinforced to me that while there are real problems there and some real frustrations of this kind of co-housing situation, there are some kind of interesting aspects too about these two different populations coming together. And the more Michael and other veterans talk to me, they've also been trying to do these things to kind of build community there. And so Michael and Robert Lane, another veteran there, had taken to at least once a month or so having these big barbecues in the courtyard. And it's a beautiful, at least aesthetically, it's a really beautiful building. There's a big enclosed courtyard. There's lots of common areas and kind of all of the different wings. There's sitting rooms with, little seating nooks and big televisions. There's a game room, a gym. But the really, sad thing is what we noticed in going to the facility a number of times is that most of the common areas aren't used at this point. And a lot of people kind of feel trapped in their own homes to an extent, because there are constantly, it seems, a handful of residents there that are just really unstable, and so are prone to kind of accosting people when they pass by, or, have outbursts of anger and stuff like that. And it's really had a kind of chilling effect on the facility. But these people are there for a reason. And so, the housing first philosophy, which has been embraced by the state of California and Eureka and the county of Humboldt since 2016, is this kind of, at once, it was kind of a revolutionary idea of a way to address the homeless crisis, which is kind of the biggest impediment to homeless people gaining some stability in their lives and addressing mental health issues, addressing addiction issues, and addressing employment issues, is housing. It's really hard to kind of, get clean or stay on a medication regimen or get in a job if you're homeless and you're kind of struggling for survival every day. So the housing first model, which really kind of gained a foothold after it was tried in Utah with great success, holds that, the biggest barrier is no strings attached housing. So rather than saying somebody needs to be quote unquote housing ready and mentally stable and sober and all of these other checklists, it holds get the people that are most vulnerable on the street, are causing the most trouble on the street for communities, get them into housing, and then try to get them as many services as you can while they're there. And so make case managers and mental health clinicians and nurses and all these folks available to them to try to help stabilize them in place. And, in talking to Jeff Brazil at the department branch, deputy branch director at DHHS with the county, he said that, this is the approach to getting tenants into the 25 rooms that DHHS manages at Bayview Heights. And they have this, this kind of formula to try to figure out who are the homeless residents of Humboldt County that are in the most need to have housing. And one of the benchmarks, or one of the criteria that they look at is first that the person has to have been homeless and has to have severe and persistent underlying mental illness. But another criteria they look at is kind of the the cost to society of leaving this person unhoused. And so the number of incarcerations, the number of psychiatric admissions, the number of emergency room admissions, and all of these things come with a cost to, not to be crass about it, but to taxpayers. And so they want to see who are these people that are sapping the most resources from these public systems to put them in housing to kind of realize that savings and try to stabilize this person and get them help in place. So that's kind of what's really unique about Bayview, though, is it's not a facility solely dedicated to housing this population. It is housing these two distinct populations, and that, maybe unsurprisingly, is causing some very real frustrations and some very real quality of life impacts to the veterans living there.
And now I think all of us had that college student apartment complex that was maybe a little wild and crazy, but reading through the article, I think a lot of the things described by the veterans were obviously scary and dangerous, but what have they done to kind of mitigate some of those concerns now? Is there plans?
Yeah, I mean, what was clear to me in reporting the story is it feels like everybody is trying. Everybody is really trying to do right and really trying to get to solutions here. So there are some kind of simple things that they've done to try to improve the situation there. So I mean, one of them is just simply requiring all visitors to the facility to show photo ID. So that they're logging all the visitors who are coming. One problem that they had early on was some folks would just have guests who ended up staying there for long periods of time and causing problems. So they're trying to really limit who comes in and out of the building and make sure they're aware of who comes in and out of the building. Mr. Brazil at DHHS was very clear with me that the supportive in permanent supportive housing needs to be bolded and underlined. And to properly support these people, they need proper staffing levels. And so we all read stories, I think, especially in the midst of the pandemic and coming immediately kind of out of the pandemic over the last year, about staffing shortages, particularly among mental health clinicians, nurses, caseworkers. And, the county of Humboldt was absolutely not immune to having trouble filling these positions. And so, he described the population, not just at Bayview, but this kind of population that's being rapidly housed under Housing First as kind of falling under a bell curve. And he said, there's people on each side that are going to do really well or really poorly, probably regardless. They're just having a really rough go of it. They're going to refuse treatment. Or on the other side, they're doing pretty well. And, maybe without a lot of support, they're still going to do pretty well. But the vast majority kind of fall in the middle, where these supports that the county can put in place can make a big difference. And so one of the things, he talked about is that for, outpatient behavioral health clients, they have a nurse check on them weekly to just visit them and check their pill boxes and help them fill their pill boxes for the week. And he said that, that's both a help in the moment, but it's also a big check, because if that nurse comes in and is like, this person has not taken their meds for 4 days, that can be an intervention. But if that position is vacant and that person's not coming to do those weekly checks, that's a situation that person could really decompose and the situation could go off the rails. And so he was, optimistic that kind of the increased staffing, they're back to close to full staff, is really going to have a marked and continued difference there.
That definitely sounds wonderful. And it's a great service that they're obviously trying to make work. Any final thoughts before we pivot, Thad?
I absolutely empathize with the situation the veterans are in there, but I do think it's a situation where folks are trying, and it's just another example of how the homeless crisis, and not just California but the nation, is really complex and really intractable and warrants solutions that necessitate a lot of resources and investment.
And trial and error at this point.
Yeah, that too.
All right. Well, thank you, Thad, for that story. I encourage everybody to pick up their copy of the North Coast Journal and read the complete article. And now we're going to turn to Jennifer and find out what's happening on this week's Arts and Features Beat. Jennifer?
So first, I have, good news, bad news. the good news is if you're looking to buy a restaurant, it is a buyer's market right now. That includes food trucks. The bad news is that some of our favorite restaurant owners are stepping away. Whether that means that the restaurant will go on without them or will close depends case by case. But there are a bunch of restaurants, some would say a glut, for sale in Humboldt County right now. Among them, like Angelina Inn. Do you remember that? They closed very suddenly in February. Gills by the Bay is up, still running, still open. You can still get your crabs, or not crab sandwich right now, but your fish and chips. But they are selling. And that one's going, it's a big property and it's right on the water. It's going for $2.5 million. So whoever won that Powerball in Fortuna, there's your purchase right there. Also, the Ivanhoe has been for sale since one of the owners died, the husband of the husband and wife team. And the Jam in Arcata is also for sale. And I spoke to a bunch of owners, and it's easy to say like, oh, well, the cannabis industry is, really suffering, and the economy in general is suffering, and those things are all true. Inflation, staffing, these are all tough things. But there are also personal things, including, family considerations. A couple weeks ago, the Ritz shut down because of a health issue from one of the owners who just cannot keep working. And all these people were going on about Facebook post about how, well, this is just typical of, our environment. And I was like, okay, yes, but also this person is a person with a personal life and decisions that they have to make for themselves. So it's a little bit of everything. The truth is it's always more complicated than it looks from the outside. But it seems like a bunch of different factors are feeding into this glut of restaurants and food trucks for sale. I spoke to, Joe Tan, who runs Curry Leaf and Overtime Pizza, which, by the way, has pizza again, in case you were crying into the tiny little table that comes in the middle of a pizza because Brett's Pizzeria was gone. They now have pizza again. It's not Chicago, it's pizza. He's looking to sell Curry Leaf. It's a big restaurant, and he had said to me in the past, like, it's too big. I don't think I want to run a big restaurant. Like, it's a big space that used to be Gonsi, and it's just too many hours. He's not seeing his family. He's sort of like, every single one of his businesses, and right now he's got 3 and then 1 in the works. They all take that extra time. Everything that makes a restaurant cost more means that you're going to be spending more time dealing it with yourself instead of paying someone else to deal with it. And he was really saying, he was very frank with me about it. He was like, the hours are crazy, the stress is crazy, the prices are crazy, staffing can be crazy. It's too much. And so, granted, the man is also opening another restaurant in Old Town, so he can't stop. But, less interested in talking about it was Joe Mazzotti of Mazzotti's in Arcata. That just had a whole makeover, right? The whole space was redone. It's very flashy. It's got the light up sign outside and everything. That was a lot of money that went into that. And now it's on the block for $850,000. So, kind of all he would say about it is that it's a business decision. And on Facebook, he posted that they're looking for someone who is interested in, quote, keeping Mazzotti's and the employees intact. So that's a tough bill also, right? You got to sell your restaurant, the space, the equipment, all those upgrades, and also have somebody keep it in Mazzotti's and also have them keep the same staff. That can be tough. We'll see what happens. The location surely cannot be beat. And yet, no, it's yeah, right.
It's a staple of the downtown Arcata,
Yeah, I don't know if you have to keep the sauce the same, but Then over in Garberville, and of course, Garberville has been hit hard. And in fact, the folks from the Ritz came up from Calico's in Garberville because they were like, yeah, you just can't make money there right now. But I talked to Moises Lopez, who owns the Eel River Cafe, which is for sale. And in fact, he was saying his business is doing good. And it is, a basic diner, relatively, low cost food and, a steady long-time staff. It's been going since 1927. He's had it for like the past dozen years. But it's a steady business, and it's one of those businesses that's like, because it's not a schmancy restaurant or not a trendy thing, it's a staple. And he said it's been steady, but he has health issues and he has to retire and he's got to do it quick. So even though, as he and pretty much everybody else I talked to said, yeah, it's a terrible time to sell, he wants out and he wants to go and live his life. Likewise, Carmack McGravy, who is over at the Coop Truck. Oh, take a minute. Have you had the chicken sandwich yet?
I have not.
You should go have the chicken sandwich. It's good.
So good.
It's
my kid's favorite.
Yeah. Everybody thinks, okay, food truck, it's not as bad as a restaurant, right? And in some ways, the overhead is certainly lower, but it is still a rough job in terms of hours. He told me he's been doing like 70, 80-hour weeks, and that doesn't really allow him to be a dad to the toddler that he's got at home. And, his toddler also, he was very frank and said that his toddler has some health issues, and he just wants to be around and be parenting more. He'd be fine, apparently, selling the truck to somebody and staying on for a while or maybe longer. He just doesn't want to run it and own it anymore, because that's the difference, right? Cooking in a restaurant or staffing a restaurant, you clock out. But as, Mike Ross from Southside Mike's, which is also for sale, anybody need a 14-foot barbecue? Yeah, it's on a trailer. Hook it up right outside the office. He was saying it's a 24-hour job. Anytime, even when you're not at the restaurant, even when you're clocked out, you're thinking about it and you're worrying about it. He's like, you're never done. So, and as he said to me, he's like, every dish that breaks, you're like, oh God. So, I get it. And he's not alone saying so. I talked to Ben Smith over at Waterfront, Cafe Waterfront, and he's been there since he was a teenager. His family has run it for 37 years. That's another old restaurant. That started as a saloon back in like the late 1800s when they were just starting up this town with dirt roads and brothels everywhere. But he was saying, after all these years, he just wants to do something different. And nobody in his family wants to take it on to go forward. And he's like, I'm in my 50s. If I'm going to do something else with my life, I got to do it now. And, I get it. And he was saying, if somebody looked at our books, the business is healthy. And he admits there's a lot of challenges. Like he was talking about the price of cooking oil doubling out of nowhere, which is no small thing when you are making your money on fish and chips, let me tell you. But at the same time, he was saying they have a steady customer base and they've had good turnover. They make good money, but does he want to do it for the rest of his days? He wants to try something new. And I get it.
Well, and the article starts off, letting you know that a restaurant in any economy is a gamble. But it looks like we're running out of time, Jennifer, and yes. I wanted you, we didn't get to shout out the wonderful article on identifying raptors in the area. So
yes. Everybody should definitely pick this up in print, but then also look online where you'll see pictures of all the different raptors so that you can stop doing what I do, which is pointing to everything, saying it's an eagle and finding out it's a turkey vulture.
Definitely.
Yeah, Sarah Hobart has you covered, and she will give you a nice primer on who's who in the skies.
All right. Well, we'll definitely pick that up. And that wraps up our time for this week. The current edition of the North Coast Journal is on newsstands now. Pick up your copy, or of course go online at northcoastjournal.com and see all those fine pictures. I am Tanya Schrum. Thanks for being with us, staying informed and supportive of our North Coast community. Thanks. Have a great week.